Welcome back to TAC Ops. This is Greg. I'm here with Eric, as always.
Howdy, howdy.
I was waiting for that.
I don't know what to say there. I need to find a good intro for myself.
No, that's perfect. We're in Texas. And today we're going to have on Ryan from Strategic Sentinel again. Really excited about this one. First, as always, our sponsor is the Commando Store. They've been a great loyal sponsor. They've been with us for a while now. One of the only sponsors, and they're a great company. They have a... Oh, you're going to pull it up there? Yeah. It's a online military surplus store that have a whole bunch of stuff here. So what do they have here you pulled up?
Mines by the crate. You can buy mines.
Oh,
nice.
Only
$150.
So you can buy a Bulgarian landmine crate. Oh, you don't get the mine with it, though, unfortunately. They always have a lot of cool stuff there. And again, it almost always dates back to the Cold War. This stuff's pretty interesting.
Mine with a fuse assembly.
Mine with a fuse assembly.
Damn,
used.
That's cool.
Yeah, so go over there and check them out. You can see it on the top here, but it's commandostore.com. Commando with a K, store.com. And if you use our coupon code at checkout, you will get 5% off your first order. Go over there and check them out again. At least look through that website. There's a lot of really, really cool, interesting stuff. commandostore.com. All right, Ryan, thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me back.
You're our first guest. As long as this works, you'll be the first one to come back successfully twice. We had on H.I. Sutton again, but lost that audio. So you are our first repeat customer.
Well, hopefully we have better luck than poor H.I. Sutton.
Yeah,
definitely.
So I think most people already know your background, at least people who are following along with our podcast. But so maybe we can just jump right into it. One of the first ones that we all talked about before. Now it's a little bit dated. Some bigger news about a month ago, but Turkey. And as we all know, there's been some tensions between the U.S. and Turkey. Turkey is a member of NATO. Normally allies, but recently they've been kind of getting more cozier with Russia, you can say. Buying Russian-made air defense systems. Talking about buying Russian fighter jets now, too. So the U.S. has considered pulling out the nuclear weapons they have there in Turkey. You want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so the United States is the only country in the world to deploy nuclear weapons in other countries. And currently, as what we think we know, the U.S. has nuclear weapons in about six facilities: Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Turkey. And we think they're all B-61 gravity bombs. And they've got about 50 or 60, we think, at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, used primarily for, though they'd be loaded up on F-16s and used on the battlefield. And in reality, they're more like a deterrent against Russia in the region. But as you said, they've been cozying up towards Russia lately in the past couple of years. They bought the S-400 from them. So the question is, do we leave the nuclear weapons in Turkey? They are a NATO ally. We're supposed to be working with them and growing our relationship and our interoperability with them, but they're cozying up with Russia. And we're not, Russia's not necessarily an enemy of ours. It's not the Cold War anymore, but can we allow 60 nuclear weapons to be housed in a country on an airbase that technically is not the United States' airbase, in a country that is cozying up with Russia? What do y'all think about that?
I mean, can you imagine? So obviously the concern about having these weapons here is at least partially stemming from the fact that if relations between the U.S. and Turkey get worse, these weapons could fall into their hands, right? Or you can lose control over these weapons. Can you imagine something like that happening?
Yeah, that's kind of complicated. Sure, I suppose in some wacky way, if Turkey kicked the United States completely out of Incirlik, I guess they could potentially get a hold of the weapons, but the weapons would be pretty much useless to them. There's something called PAL, and to use the nuclear weapon, you have to have a key code, just like one would normally think, and there's anti-tampering devices on the weapon. What would likely happen is, before leaving, even in a rush, the personnel on the base, there's probably a procedure to either destroy or permanently disable the weapon. that would cause its own issues, but they probably wouldn't fall into Turkey's hands. And even if they did, Turkey wouldn't be able to use them, even though they have F-16s and we have F-16s there. There's a modification that you would need on the particular F-16 to be able to carry the weapon.
Hmm.
Their F their F-16s might have that modification. I don't know, but anyways, they wouldn't be able to use the weapons if they got a hold of them. And Russia honestly probably knows more about how that B-61 works than most nuclear technicians in the United States. It's a very common, very old weapon that's gone through a lot of modifications.
Right. I think the scary part is the reverse engineering part of it. You know, it may not
Right.
work. It may be disabled, but now you get to see, the mechanisms to disable a nuke. You get to see how the physics patch works. You get to see all of this stuff that normally doesn't. You just find normally on
Yeah,
online.
the biggest fear from that probably wouldn't be so much Turkey getting to inspect them, but somehow Turkey losing control of them and them falling into the hands of non-state actors like a terrorist organization of some kind. I think that would be the biggest security problem there.
Yeah, you mentioned having they're under lock and key, or they have some sort of combination lock on them. I do recall, I remember reading a story about, or listening, I don't remember exactly where I heard it from, but they were talking about the Jupiter missiles, right? The nuclear short, medium range ballistic missiles that the U.S. had placed in Turkey back in the 60s. And I remember reading about how Turkey was pretty upset because they wanted these missiles to be under their own control. Because if the Cold War did go hot and Russia invaded or started attacking, they were right on the front line, right? They didn't want any gap or any delay or anything between them having to have to first get approval from the U.S. or having someone come over with the combination or anything like that. So these are a little bit different because these are actually on a U.S. base where Turkey doesn't have direct access to them. Even if they can't get the key or a combination to actually activate them, they can still break into the weapons and start pulling out the plutonium cores and stuff like that, right?
Probably not, and it's not an American base. This is a Turkish-controlled air base, so they pretty much the Turks have free reign in the area now. There
Oh,
are some now there's some security safeguards that don't allow um, Turkish officials direct access to the weapons. We think, but I mean, there's something called the two-man rule, where at least two trained personnel need to be in the room or working with the weapon directly instead of one. But I digress. Probably, um, they wouldn't be able to. They would probably wouldn't be able to access the weapons regardless, even if they, like I said, they completely took back over the base. The personnel leaving the base, even in a quick manner, like I said, probably have some sort of checklist to essentially render the weapons completely unusable or even destroy them. So, like, I think if you look online really quick, there is a picture that actually shows B-61s on their rack being lifted out from underground. So essentially, they're in these rooms that fit one F-16 or F-15 or whatever airplane it is, and this rack is underground and it lifts up out of the ground, and that's how they have access to the B-61 to be able to put it on the airplane. It's possible that there's some sort of safeguard that would allow technicians to detonate the yes, that rack right there. I think is very yeah, that rack right there that you're showing on YouTube looks correct. There'd probably be a way to detonate the conventional explosives in the weapon to render them useless. But and Turkey probably wouldn't want them anyways. I mean, they probably wouldn't want to screw with them anyways. I would think they're really not much use to them.
so you're not confident, but that looks like a picture that's coming out of the ground. The background's blurred out or just out of
Yeah,
focus.
that's either a ground transporter, which is just a rack that they can tow around with the weapons on them, or that's the actual rack that comes out from under the ground. But it looks something very similar to that.
Huh? Interesting.
Yeah, and they just keep them like that. That's what the B-61 looks like.
So there, are they stored like that through normal use, or actually stored in bunkers at the base? How are they stored typically at a
Yeah,
base?
at the base, yeah, they're stored in bunkers at Incirlik. And if you look on Google Earth, it's not hard to see. You can actually see the bunkers that they're in. They're designed, if I remember correctly, I do believe some of the bunkers are even designed in a way to attenuate an explosion. Whereas you can see at the Pentex plant in Amarillo, there's some shallow domes where they work on weapons like the B-61 and the B-83 to attenuate any kind of explosion that could occur. I believe on Incirlik Air Base, if you look, there might be a couple of those somewhere around. But
Hmm.
yeah, they're pretty well protected in bunkers on this airbase.
Interesting. It's it's interesting the use of gravity bombs still in modern combat. I mean, with modern long range air defense systems, I mean, are these weapons still survivable? Are they still going to be able to get through and drop a gravity bomb over a target and then escape before it goes off? Or
Well, you're kind of asking the right question. Essentially, these weapons, in a nutshell, are more political than they are useful. I mean, tactical weapons in 2019, tactical nuclear weapons in 2019, kind of are moot. I mean, there's really, unless we're talking India and Pakistan or maybe North Korea and South Korea, there really isn't a situation in the world that tactical nuclear weapons could really be used. This isn't East Germany or Europe. This isn't the 1980s, and that's a battlefield. So they're really a political bargaining chip and like a political. They're kind of a political tool that the United States uses to keep Russia in check, essentially, and that's why we have them at Incirlik Air Base. So removing the weapons, the question of taking them out of Turkey, is not just a. It's not just a, well, they're not safe there, let's take them out. It's a whole political question. It's a whole deal about, can we, if we take these weapons out, what kind of signal does that send Russia? Will Russia then just increase its partnership with Turkey? So it's really not an easy question. Even though on the outside you would think, well, sure. I mean, Turkey's been acting very almost belligerent towards the United States and NATO. We definitely don't need to be keeping nuclear weapons there. But on the flip side, they, can we really take them out within the current political, you know, current political, geopolitical kind of hemispheres we got going on between an emerging Russia, a newly emerging, I mean, a resurgent Russia and an emerging China? Can we take the weapons out, move them somewhere else? What kind of signal does that send? What would that entail for the region? So yeah, they're really not that useful. I don't think, my opinion. They're really not useful in a military sense. They're just political bargaining chips, really.
Yeah,
Political signal.
I think strategically with Turkey, you lose the Bosphorus, right? So you lose the Black Sea,
oh yeah,
and we barely have any kind of influence there as it is. We get to send one ship in there at a time, but if Turkey doesn't allow you in there, you don't get to go. They control what goes in and out. So
yeah, and that
it is
gives
what it
Right.
is.
it gives Russia
Yeah, and
access and out to the Med.
Huge.
Russia wants to guarantee access to the Bosphorus totally, because that allows their Black Sea fleet to be able to move in and out.
Yeah, not just be stuck there in the sea. I think it's interesting you're talking about how it's more of a political uh, bargaining chip. And it's interesting how many weapons are used almost for that purpose. Like, there's a lot of discussion around this nuclear powered cruise missile that Russia is developing. And there's a lot of people talking
Yeah,
about how it could be
that's
more
a
of a
great point.
political bargaining chip than anything else.
That's a great point. When in the world are you going to use that thing? When is that useful? I mean, when is it more dangerous to use that rather than risk the danger? I mean, because if that thing fails or somebody shoots it out of the sky and it disintegrates, can you imagine the swath of area that you would contaminate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It,
look what happened
I
to
mean,
them. They lost it, and they tried to
right.
bring it back up, and it blew up and killed 6 guys. I think 6 of the salvagers that were trying to bring it back up. Yeah, I mean, that was
It
just trying to
probably
salvage them.
contaminated, yeah, probably contaminated a large area. And I know that I saw reports from when this happened a couple months ago that Russia had disabled, or it appeared that they had disabled a couple of IAEA monitoring sites that were that could have been in
Oh yeah.
the
Right.
vicinity of any kind of particulate fallout from this incident. So yeah,
Just to hide it.
I
Yeah,
mean, a
that's right.
nuclear cruise missile. I mean, it's a great idea on paper, I mean, a missile that you can launch and then it just stays in the air until you need to use it. That's awesome. But in reality, if that thing crashes, say it's orbiting over the Arctic Circle or something, and it crashes near, I don't know, Murmansk, that's gonna the swath of area that thing contaminates is more of a detriment to the Russians who launched the weapon than it would be useful as a weapon in general against whoever they think their enemy is.
Yeah, it's interesting. So some of these weapons could just be to during an arms treaty or arms discussions on non-proliferation or different restrictions on different weapons and all that. They can almost just say, "Look, we have this. You know, we're willing to get rid of this if you do this. We want you to do something in
Sure.
exchange." You know,
Why
even if
not?
this weapon works or it doesn't work, they can say, "We'll get rid of it for that." So that kind of brings up.
We were,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying we were talking about H.I. Sutton earlier, and I remember a really good kind of article he did about. And Eric, you'll have to tell me what is the name of that massive torpedo that Russia is developing?
Oh, the Poseidon weapon.
Yeah,
I
I
mean, they
thought
have
it
a
was
bunch of different
Poseidon.
names from it. Status 6, Poseidon, the Kraken. Yeah, they have a. Yeah, I don't know. They all have
The
different names.
Death Ring
Right.
again, like the nuclear cruise missile. What's the point? What is the actual military point of having something like that? There's a reason nobody else did it.
It's a deterrence weapon. It's supposed to be
Right,
scarier than the scary.
Well, and also I
right.
think to avoid U.S. air defense
Oh,
or missile
sure.
defense, I meant to say, because you know George Bush, I think it was 2002 or 2003, pulled out of the ABM treaty, and I think the Russians got real scared that the U.S. is going to develop this all-encompassing SDI Star Wars type thing, where it might render all their ICBMs useless. So they had to develop these
Yeah, and then
alternative
50 times the
weapons.
power. Right.
Hmm.
So I mean, but essentially, when you get down to it, weapons like these, they're political more than they are military.
Yeah, what's
Even
scarier
though
than a
they're
nuke? A nuke that
right.
carries a nuke that launches nukes. You know,
Yeah.
it's I mean, because that was like Project Pluto, right? It was a nuclear powered jet that launched nukes out of it, and then when it died, it would spray nuclear
Radiation all
yeah,
over.
particles all
flew.
over the flight path, and then it would fly in, and it'd be a nuke itself. It's just crazy. It's just like you get to a point where it just doesn't make any sense anymore. You know,
Yeah, you get
when
to
it's
a
a
point where
world killer, it doesn't make any sense.
I can't remember who said this, and I'm probably not even quoting it correctly, but I swear somebody in popular culture somewhere on a nuclear movie, a nuclear Holocaust movie, or something like that, said something like, at 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 some point you're just killing God's creation. Like
Mhm.
you're just you're going way too far.
Yeah, I've been reading a little bit into different battles in World War II, or reading about the German nuclear program and stuff like that. And then after a bunch of these German scientists that the U.S. had captured, or the Allies had captured, I'm not 100% sure it was the U.S., but once these German scientists who worked on Germany's Nazis' nuclear program learned about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were just amazed that they couldn't understand how the U.S. was able to make it work, how they actually were able to develop these weapons. And it's just so crazy how the world changed there, right? I mean, for all of history, before World War II, battle was somewhat limited. I mean, obviously we had two world wars, but after that point, we got to the point where we can virtually destroy the entire world, right? I mean, just wipe out everything. I mean, I think that forever changed this war. I mean, there's never a World War III after that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of scholars and academians who um, talk about this. You know, are we safer actually because of the advent of the nuclear weapon? Is it a stabilizing um, is it a stabilizing force in the world, or could we get rid of nuclear weapons altogether and we would still be just as stable, if not more, than we are right now? And it's a good thought question. Lots of people have given different theories on both sides of the fence of that. So yeah, the world changed big time in 1945 when the United States was able to develop the nuclear weapon. So it's it's crazy where history has taken us thus far, and it's crazy to think where history is going to take us, 50 years from now with weapons technologies.
Yeah, it really has changed a lot. So, staying on the topics of nuclear weapons, before we were kind of discussing the U.S.'s options of building a new ballistic ICBM.
Yeah, so they're working on the new ground based
Deterrent. I think
strategic
that's it. Yeah.
deterrence. Yeah, ground based deterrence.
Very boring very boring names.
Something like
Seems
that.
like a lot of the
It's
names
a
are real
new nuclear
boring
weapon.
recently for
Right.
the
So
U.S.
Russia developed a new ICBM about a decade ago. They've been testing it on and off, and I think they finally got it fielded. Whereas the United States, the Minuteman III was developed in the late '60s, and it
Yeah.
was fielded in the '70s and the '80s. So it's a very old missile, and that means that it has to have constant maintenance. As things get older, they have to be maintained. Um, I read a very thorough article by, I want to say it was by um, Mr. Narang from MIT, Professor Narang, and a buddy of his wrote this, and I think they published it on War of the Rocks. It was a very good article. If I could find it, I will certainly link it. Um, and they went through pretty much the entire history of the Minuteman, and they were advocating against a new ICBM, saying that it would be cheaper and easier just to extend the life of the Minuteman III. And they also brought up the question: do we even need a land-based deterrent anymore? As since the world has progressed thus far, do we even need a ICBM anymore? And they gave some potential answers to some of their questions. But essentially, do what do y'all think? Do we need a new ICBM? Should we just keep maintaining the Minuteman III? Yes, it's going to get more expensive to keep maintaining them, but it's will end up being a little bit cheaper. What do y'all think? Is
Yeah, it
this
is.
or back to the political question? Is this political? Is this a political motive to give Lockheed, or it wasn't Lockheed, Northrop Grumman money and to feed the military industrial complex?
It is interesting. I think almost you could get away with just submarine based ballistic missiles, but at the same time, I think that's a yeah, if there's any failure in that system on a larger scale, that's going to negate the entire your entire nuclear deterrent if that's all you have.
Right.
So I'd
Sure.
say you almost have to have like two separate. I mean, maybe you can just go with submarine based weapons, but you can have two separate programs because if with cyber warfare and things like that, if you're able to exploit a glitch in the Trident system, then that's everything you have offline.
Right. You
Or
can't put all
something
your
like
eggs
that.
in one basket, right?
Right. Yeah. So maybe almost if you had
Sure.
two separate systems and you kept them separate, but yeah, you know how that is. Um,
Well, we have our air deterrent. I mean, we've got, like we were talking about, B-61s. We have B-61s, and we have cruise missiles that we can launch from B-52s and B-2s. But the so on the if some a lot of people talk about the nuclear sponge. So like ICBMs, Minuteman threes are actually a nuclear sponge, where the Russians, typically that's who we talk about when we talk about nuclear adversaries. Like the Russians would have to target all these silos that we have around because they don't know if what missiles are in them or missiles aren't in them.
right.
So in essence, it is eliminating a majority of their nuclear force just to take care of our silos.
Right. But if you have them strictly on submarines in the ocean, you know you can nuke the entire ocean. You know, shotgun spread them out
Sure.
to hit every square area. I'd hope there's a Ohio class or eventually a Columbia class submarine underneath it. Why do you think it is that? So you were talking about the Minuteman III developed in the '70s or even the late '60s. That Russia has been developing so many new missiles since then. I mean, we're still sticking with pretty much the same weapons we had way back then, and they've developed like three or four. I mean, they even have the Sarmat,
The Sarma, yeah, that was
heavy
the one.
ICBM.
So that's a great question. The Russians have always diversified their nuclear weapons. And the United States did this too back in the 50s and the 60s and even the 70s. They the Russians have always put a nuclear weapon in pretty much anything you can think of. They had the suitcase nuke. Um, they had uh, they had, I think they in the United States did this too. That we had nuclear weapons for civilian use for construction. That didn't work out for either side, so that those programs were quickly canceled. But the Russians have always diversified. They've put nuclear weapons in a lot of their conventional systems. So a lot of their conventional systems that they have can field whatever nuclear weapon they have. Whereas in the United States, our conventional systems have to be very special to be able to field like a nuclear weapon. Like take the Tomahawk for example. There used to be a nuclear version of the Tomahawk missile. We no longer have it, but it had to be such a special design. It was based on the Tomahawk, but it had to be this special, more expensive uh, Tomahawk to be able to field our weapons. Whereas in Russia, everything's interchangeable. Most everything that's conventional can have a nuclear weapon on it. That's including torpedoes and cruise missiles and all kinds of medium and long range missiles and their SLBMs that they put on submarines. So the the way that Russia designs weapons and missiles in particular is they take a different approach to what the United States takes to an approach. So the United States works really hard, pours a lot of money into their weapons to make them perfect with the given technology that they have. Whereas the Russians typically, and things have changed over history, and they may not necessarily do this anymore, but typically the Russians what they would do is they would rush to be able to mass produce a weapon. They would find a weapon that worked well enough to be able to mass produce it. And the way they would test their weapons is they would just test them and test them and test them until they didn't fail. It's kind of what they did with their moon rocket, the N1. They would just test and test and test, and well, that never worked.
Yeah.
But they work at it and they tweak it until it doesn't blow up, basically. And so the technology that they field is not necessarily as good as the technology as the United States would, more or less. And again, some things are different. Something Russia sometimes does better things than the United States, but that's just kind of their mindset. So they constantly are developing new systems, and the old systems that they have that used to be able to field nuclear weapons, they can just put a conventional warhead on that. And they use that for other purposes. So in a sense, the Russians are more interchangeable than the United States' weapons. So that's why they have more of them. That's why they're more diverse.
So, like you were mentioning, they'll slap a nuclear warhead pretty much on any conventional weapon. Why doesn't the U.S. do that? I understand there's a lot of safety procedures. Is there anything though in particular? Like for example, the air launched cruise missile, the AGM-86. That's they launch off the B-52, the nuclear bomb cruise missiles. Nuclear warhead on the cruise missile, and now they're working on the new one called the LRSO, the long range standoff weapon. It's going to be a new cruise missile with the nuclear warhead on it to replace that air launched cruise missile. What I've always kind of wondered is why can't they just slap a nuclear warhead on a JASM or something like that? Do you know? I know this isn't necessarily your area of expertise, but is there a lot of safety procedures? I mean, it needs to be guaranteed to work almost every time, compared to that of a conventional warhead JASM or Tomahawk, even.
That is a complicated question. The easiest answer to that is there's a different philosophy between the two countries. The United States has one philosophy, Russia has another. The United States sees nuclear weapons as a very special device. They have very specific procedures, with very specific war plans in which they intend to use nuclear weapons, and very specific war plans in which they intend not to use nuclear weapons. Russia doesn't care. Russia's philosophy is the nuclear weapon is a tool to be used whenever it becomes viable. So whenever a commander or um, back in the Soviet days, the Politburo, or now um, President Putin decides that a nuclear weapon should be used in this instance, they have no problem using that said weapon. whereas the United States is very rigid, very specific on use of nuclear weapons. So, in essence, um, I, that could filter down into weapon design.
Mm.
So, the as far as safety procedures go, from what I understand, Russia and the United States share very similar safety procedures on weapons themselves. Russia has been known to store their weapons in very precarious manners, but actually, the actual use of the weapon seems to be pretty similar. And Eric could probably talk more about how on Russian boomers, actually, the procedures are far more stringent than U.S. nuclear submarines and nuclear launch authority and how that all works. And even in Russia, the the missiles in SLBMs in boomers are actually completely sealed, and they are loaded into the submarine as a sealed device. Whereas in the United States, the missile is just loaded into the tube, but in Russia, the tube is loaded into the submarine so that nobody can tamper with it. So it's philosophy, but it also goes back to in the United States has this big military industrial complex where each weapon has to be very specific and it would be hard to modify it. Like going back to the Tomahawk, like the Tomahawk had to be specially modified so that it could accept the warhead, and there had to be extra electronics. And then the warhead itself is bigger than the conventional warhead because it's got several stages. It's got conventional explosives and the nuclear package, the physics package. So it's just complicated mess, but essentially it's philosophy of use.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean it's a cruise missile, right? So you can launch it from, I mean, anything, the back of a trailer, and shoot it 1,500 miles, and it has a nuke on it. So it's what everybody fears with the whole low yield nuke, right? Because you're not going to put a big giant yield on a cruise missile. You're going to put a small yield on it, and it's going to be tactical for whatever your quote unquote tactical reason is, but it's still a freaking nuke and it scares the shit out of people. So that's one of the reasons they got rid of the UGM 109 Alpha, the one we were shown on there, is because the Alpha it's a nuke. It's if you're gonna make every cruise missile a nuke or possibly a nuke, now every cruise missile is possibly a nuke. Now you have to
True.
treat every single cruise missile launched as a nuke, and we've been launching cruise missiles
Right.
like crazy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Damn,
that's a
John
good
Warner's
point.
shot like 20 something cruise missiles at this point.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. That's something I didn't touch on. That's true. So, if all your conventional weapons can carry nuclear weapons and there's no specific designation between the two, how does the other side know that you're not launching a nuclear weapon? That's a really good point. I forgot about that.
No, it is. Yeah, it absolutely is. I know there's been a lot of talk about, um, well, even going. I remember 5 or 6 years ago they were talking about making a hypersonic glide vehicle launched from a Minuteman, or at least a long-range ballistic missile. Have that up on top of it. But the concern was that Russia or other nations wouldn't know if this Minuteman is armed with nuclear warheads or if it's armed with this hypersonic strike weapon. So you're having the same issue with that as well. I guess that's most people don't fire ballistic missiles to strike somebody in everyday situations. It's more of a tomahawk strike or a cruise missile striker with the caliber with Russia when they hit some ISIS targets 3-4 years back.
Sure, I mean, uh, land-based ballistic missiles, in essence, for almost every country that fields them, they're strategic weapons, and the countries that have nuclear weapons, they're strategic nuclear weapons. Um, you're not gonna. I can't recall an instance where a land-based ballistic missile was used on another country, unless somebody can come up with something that I'm forgetting.
There was,
Yes, so,
yeah, well, there was a few. Maybe I think I missed the first part of what you said. I'm sorry to cut you off, but well, Iran launched a few at Syria, right? Different targets in Syria. I believe Russia's launched a few Iskander or the Tochka. I'm trying to
well,
blank
sure.
there, but I
Yeah,
know Iran has launched a few.
there's been some instances like that, but there's not been. I'm talking like something of the Minuteman III class or of the Sarmat class. There hasn't.
Oh
You know,
yeah,
when countries see launches like that, they're
they're gonna
gonna
get scared.
assume
Yeah,
that they're nuclear. And back in 1995, actually, Russia thought that a sounding rocket launched, I believe, off of Wallops in Virginia, or not? No, I'm sorry, it was not Wallops. It wasn't a U.S. missile. It was a Norwegian, or it was a it was a European missile of some kind that was a sounding rocket, I think. And they thought that that might have been a nuclear missile. So it's not something that you would want the other side to think that you were trying to harm them in any way.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's weird, right? So you can be testing, you can be launching something that is intended for something else, but if it could be this thing, then we all have to treat it as this thing, right? That's how the military treats everything. Like if there's a potential fire, if there's a potential flooding, if there's potential anything, if it's the whole reason the military is so successful at what it does is because it prepares for that thing. So we're going to assume that it's going to be that thing and be ready for it, right? And when it comes to nukes, that's kind of a deal, right? It more than likely isn't going to be 99% of the time, and even the 1% that we think it is, it's probably false or fake or a bad alarm or whatever.
Right.
And it is what it is, but it could be, right? So that's where it gets really weird with Russia sending these 10 submarines down through the Guic, the Guic Gap. We don't really know what they're doing, but they're doing it, and they're going to test to see if they can do it, and nobody really knows what's going on. At least we don't know at this point.
Oh, also real quick to clarify, if anyone is not familiar with it, that would be the GUIC would be the Greenland, UK, or Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, right?
Right.
So that's that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's that gap between. There's two ways you can either go between Greenland and Iceland, or you can go between Iceland and the UK, and that's a very important strategic point, at least back in the Cold War, still today.
Oh, it still is today.
Oh yeah, for Russia's northern fleet, which would have to break through that area to kind of get out into the Atlantic and start hitting, NATO convoys or any warships out there to really operate anywhere besides the Arctic Ocean.
Right, and we've seen this before, right? So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had the 4 Foxtrots skip through the Guic Gap. We knew they were there. They transited all the way down there. They got all the way down there. We knew they were there, but
Caribbean, right?
Yeah, we knew they were there, but we couldn't really stop them. They made it the whole way, and then they started having issues with their submarines not being able to deal with the heat because the Caribbean waters are a little bit warmer than the Arctic waters, and they started to overheat. And same deal with Ryan Ramsey. Their system started to overheat, and they had to bail out essentially because they couldn't.
Air conditioners broke, was it?
Well, the Russians didn't have the air conditioners. The Russians just had their systems set up for the cold water. So when they got to the warm waters, their systems couldn't deal with the warm water that couldn't keep up with other systems. So,
and not only that, if you don't have air conditioning, it could be pretty uncomfortable.
They had to bail out, yeah. So they had to bail out. So now it's interesting to see them go down there and this is kind of their second version of that, where we're not going down there to deal with the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're just going to go down there just to say go fuck you guys. We're going to go down there just so we can go down there because it's the Atlantic. So it's really interesting to hear about those 10 submarines. I mean 10 submarines are pretty much overwhelming. You're not going to... I don't think you're going to find all 10. Hell, we couldn't find the 4 Foxtrots that went down there at the time. They'll throw 10 silent nuclear submarines or whatever they're doing.
I think the biggest signal that it sends is that what Russia's trying to do is prove that it can operate on a much larger scale than it has been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Something I was talking about before we went live here. Back in the Cold War, Russian submarines typically only operated for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, whereas U.S. submarines, especially when we entered the nuclear age for submarines, could operate much longer. And we started doing the deterrence patrols 70, 78 days at a time, whereas the Russians could really only keep deterrence patrols at 2 or 3 weeks before they needed to go back to port. So I think what they're trying to say is maybe that since the Navy has been not well kept, especially their submarines and their nuclear submarines in particular have not been well kept. But we can operate on a larger scale. We can break through the Gap, and we can operate in the Atlantic unrestricted. And what are you going to do about it?
Right.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing we talked to when we talked to Jive Turkey. He talked a lot about so back a little bit to the question remember I had for you about Russia building all these new missiles. Well, Russia's also been building a lot of different various types of submarines where the U.S. has not done quite as many. And he kind of described it as Russia does it for more propaganda purposes. They'll build a nice big new shiny submarine, a whole new class of them, build a few of them, and the problem is they don't have as good maintenance as they do in the U.S. So they'll be nice, they'll be quiet, everything will be great about them for a few years, and then after a while they'll start deteriorating, they'll start breaking down or having problems, and you'll be able to pick them up on sonar real easily. So I think the same thing applies here too with them. Yeah, 10 is a large number of submarines. So how many submarines does Russia have? Do you know? Because they have a mix. They have both nuclear and conventional, which the U.S. does not have.
Yeah.
Right, they have
Submarines.
kilos.
Right.
Yeah, they have kilos, which are conventional submarines, and they have their alphas and their newer attack submarines, and then they have their Delta fours and their one very lonely Typhoon that they use as a
Oh.
testing
Yeah.
platform now
Right.
for Typhoon.
Well,
Yeah.
that
And the Akulas. I mean, they I think they have 30. I don't know what it is. I have to look it up.
total submarines.
Yeah.
I would assume more. Than
Well, you got to understand when it comes to any country that runs diesels,
that. Yeah.
they'll say that those diesels work, and
Right,
who
but they're
knows?
sitting in pier. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
they're not
there,
fully
but the whole thing
deployed.
comes down to how many could they, at a snap of a finger, deploy right then and there?
Right.
Probably not.
It's a whole lot different to say, our submarines are deployable because they have to be forward deployed. They have to be able to go across the entire ocean, whereas, a Russian submarine has to go.
Travel around the Arctic for a little bit and go back.
No, it doesn't even have to do that. I mean, if it's deployable, it has to go from the port, has to make a little figure eight out in the port. You could see it the whole time. Doesn't even have to go under the water and then just pull back in. It's deployable because we deployed it out 40 feet from the pier. It's all words, right? And
Yeah.
we can't necessarily do that. We can't say it's deployable because everybody in the United States is going to know that the Boise, for example, is not deployable because it's been fucking sitting in a not sitting in a dry dock, but it's been sitting waiting for repairs for 2 years, and it is not ready to go out to sea. So we all know that it's a huge deal, and that's just one of the 50-ish submarines that we have. But
Yeah.
when it comes to countries where, especially when submarines are more of a morale builder for the state, they're
Almost an afterthought.
yeah, they're a we are great because we have this one technology, and I mean,
Well, yeah, like Argentina and stuff like that. Yeah. Eric, I do have a question for you though. How much food, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but how much food can you fit on a nuclear submarine? So obviously, a nuclear submarine can pretty much run indefinitely, right?
Right.
Submerged. Really, only limited by the crew endurance.
and maintenance.
Okay, and maintenance. Yeah. So if you were to send out,
But with maintenance, y'all can build a lot of your own tools and fix a lot of your own parts, except if it's something really major.
if it's outside or something like that, if it's exterior or something,
Right.
right? So so if these Russian submarines did work perfectly, how long could they really be out there for? Traveling from Murmansk or any of the area up there where they have all their submarine bases, out there, without having to have to go to a port somewhere to restock.
So, I mean, every submarine's different. It really depends on how much food you can put in, because food's going to be the only thing that stops
Limiting
you. Because
factor, yeah.
air, sewage, water, power, everything is all pretty much renewable, but food isn't.
Right.
That's the only thing you can't renew underway. So the best thing to do is freeze as much as possible, store as much canned food as you can, and then, I'll actually pull up a picture in just a second, but like the French submarines, they'll actually store vegetables and stuff in the torpedo room. You just literally fill the boat up as much as you can with as
Right.
much food as possible, And you know, if it rots or whatever, I mean, I guess you get rid of it, but at least you have it.
Yeah, as
right?
much as possible, so you're pretty much sleeping on a thing of carrots or something, a bed of carrots.
Right.
But
so, and that's where like maintenance becomes a big deal, right? So let's say you're really good at maintaining the reactor, you're really good at maintaining the torpedo systems, but what happens if your refrigeration system goes down? Now your whole boat's completely fucking worthless because you have no food, and now you've got a week left. You've got enough water to keep everybody alive, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Right. So now, all because of one system, the refrigeration system or the freezer system, fails. Now it doesn't matter if the reactor works. It doesn't matter if the torpedo system works. It doesn't matter if the missile system works. You ain't got no way to feed people.
So if you had to estimate, I mean, there's obviously several different classes of Russian submarines. But how long do you think it? Like 3 months, 4 months?
Yeah, 3 months. 3 months is
that would be around the limit of what you can fit.
Well, for nuclear power, right?
Nuclear power, yeah.
Right. Diesel, you have to refuel, and
right.
There's all kinds of different variables. But for nuclear power, it's generally about 90 days. Now that's pushing it. That's like record setting is 90 days.
You might almost be rationing food and stuff.
Yeah, normally you're gonna do about 45 days. You know, and we actually had an underway where we had a cook who was going to be he was going to be the chief for the underway for the first time. He was a first class, but our chief was sick, so he was going to be in charge of dealing with the food. So he actually scheduled the food, brought all the food in, everything was going to happen. And we ran out of food 3 days early. So we were on rice. Like, we were literally eating nothing but rice for 3.5 days. So it was rice for breakfast. So we would wake up and we would have rice for breakfast, and we would just eat rice, just white rice. And then for lunch we would put hot sauce on the rice. Nice. So we would have hot sauce rice. And then for dinner we would put soy sauce on it. So we would have soy sauce rice, or A1, or whatever we had.
So you have a nice variation there.
Yeah,
of rice.
It was always different flavors of rice. But I mean,
I bet the sewage system was really happy that it only had to process one kind of solid.
Oh yeah, the sewage system was. The morale system was definitely not happy about dealing with that. But you know, that was just a small mistake, and we didn't even know that till we were already out for weeks. Like, you know, and the captain didn't know. Nobody knew. So you know, those little mistakes. And that's just the food supply, not including the maintenance. What happens if the storekeepers or the guys who are bringing the repair parts on forget to bring this valve, and this valve fails? Well, now you're not going to be able to operate because you can't sense depth, because this one valve is the one valve that senses depth or whatever, you know. So it can be a huge deal. So normally it's food. The second factor is going to be maintenance and repairs.
And then even morale eventually, right? You can start to suffer there a little bit.
No, I mean the morale is going to be lacking and horrible as it is. it's just part of life. You're going to push through it. I mean because all you have to understand that you're on a submarine, so you're at the will of these people, the states. So you're going to do whatever the fuck they tell you to do.
So in talking about this big Russian deployment of 10 nuclear submarines, which I don't even know if they're back yet. We don't know how successful this Russian mission was at all. It goes with the saying, you know, it's more complicated than just it's a complicated answer. There's not just one or two factors. There's several things you got to think about when it comes to being able to deploy a nuclear submarine.
Yeah, I mean, it could go both ways. I mean, the United States could have known this is going to happen. They've had human intelligence wait for this to happen. They've been sitting out sensors, and they've just recorded this whole thing, and it's been nothing but a great intelligence gathering for them. Or it could have been a complete disaster. They didn't know it was even going to happen, and now there's 10 submarines floating around. We don't know what the fuck's going on. So, you know, it's one of the great things about what I love about our podcast and who we talk to is we really have no idea. I mean, and we're not going to know. And if we do know, it's a huge issue.
And if you do know, you can't save, right?
We're like ESPN with the military, right? Like, nobody's going to know what's going to happen in the Cowboys game tomorrow. Right. Like, but we're going to assume that the Cowboys are going to win, and everything's going to be okay, and, you know, it is what it is. So.
That's a really bad assumption.
Exactly.
So the interesting question is if the U.S. and allies were able to track these submarines and are following them right now. I mean, like Eric was saying, we really do not know too much about it. It's almost certain that the U.S. picked these submarines up going through the GIUK line we have pulled up on here.
Yeah, I would hope they'd pick them up. I mean, like we have P8s based out of Keflavik, Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have a massive, massive air base in Iceland at Keflavik, and I've heard from a service member from the Air Force that it really was a very enjoyable place to be based at and to work at. It was cold in the winter, but it actually was a pretty enjoyable place, and it's where we had a lot of anti-submarine warfare, um, airplanes and facilities to service U.S. Navy warships and submarines and whatnot. A lot of that's gone away, and it's mainly just P8s now that are based at the international airport at Keflavik. But I'm sure they were operating day and night while this was going on. Well, when you're close inboard to Iceland, and the gap in general on both sides, it's relatively shallow. If you look at a chart, it's relatively shallow. So there's really not much. There's not really you can really kind of trap the submarines in there, and if you can drop enough sonobuoys, which are just these little sounding devices that allow you to listen in. Some of them are active sonobuoys, some of them are passive sonobuoys, and it helps the airplane figure out where the submarines are. If you can drop a bunch of sonobuoys in that gap, the submarines have to pass through that gap. So if you get there before the submarines and you're able to constantly have the gap filled with sonobuoys, you might have a good chance of detecting at least a few of them. But after that, before and after that, it'd be really hard. And if you didn't have good trained crews, which the best ASW P8 pilots are based in Castleflick right now, but even then, if they're not really up to snuff, it's really challenging. I don't know how much experience Eric might have from the air side of ASW, but I'm sure that while he was a submariner, I'm sure you guys were the prey a couple of times to some ASW airplanes. I mean, can you tell us, were they good? There's a lot of ocean out there. Well, it depends. It actually depends on the ocean conditions. Depends on the salinity, and it depends on the temperature. Uh, Something like 5 to 10,000 yards. So you pretty much have to drop it right on the submarine. Yeah, really not a lot. No, it's not. Sure. Hey, Greg, Eric, some people are commenting that they can't hear you two, but they can hear me.
Oh, sorry
Oh,
about
there we
that.
go.
We clicked the
We,
button.
we got too many buttons we're clicking on. Sorry, we muted, but
Hey, Cannon Potter 43, good man.
yeah,
That's
Good on you for noticing that.
he's been helpful before. Cannon fodder 43, yeah. Cannon fodder 42 is not very helpful. I'll
yeah.
say that.
No, no, screw that guy. We like 43 better.
Yeah.
But like what you were saying was, there's a huge difference between submarines and carriers, but there's a huge difference between submarines and helicopters, right? Because submarines can't shoot down aircraft. It's not something they've been designed to do. I mean,
They can't. There
randomly,
are a few.
there's a few.
But that would take a last line of defense weapon. You'd never want to use that. Different man pads they can have shooting out of the conning tower or something. But
Right.
you never want to use that. You're screwed if you ever do, right?
Right, the helicopters they'll just drop right on top of you, and then they can drop the sonar, which is what we're actually showing a video right now.
Oh, this is a good video.
Of the dipping sonar from Raytheon, and
the
then
Mark
they can
54.
actually attack. They can drop a torpedo. Boom! Oh, we found you. Here comes a torpedo coming at you. Right. So
And like you were talking about, like this MH60R that they're showing here has something called a magnetic anomaly detector, a MAD. Like you said, they're not as effective these days with the acoustic tiles that are on submarines, but they have MAD that they can use. And if anybody's read Red Storm Rising, you'll know that there are some amazing scenes that Tom Clancy writes
Oh yeah.
about using MAD to detect and destroy submarines. I mean, it's some of the best writing that I have ever read in my life. Is this scene of a helicopter pilot just hammering Russian submarines with his helicopter and just out there day in and day out trying to kill Russian submarines. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, that's a really good book. If anyone has not read that, definitely read it. I personally, I think it has a little bit of U.S. bias in it. It's Tom Clancy. The U.S. is going to come out victorious at the end. But it is a great book, though. It definitely has a lot of really cool scenes, as Ryan was saying there, discussing different battles and things that'll take place. But it is a good book, yeah.
So one of the things I'm gonna bring us off a little bit of topic is the toilet bomb. Did you happen to hear about the toilet bomb, Mr. Barenklau?
The toilet bomb. Yes, I saw a picture. I don't know what kind of airplane that was. It looked either like an aardvark or
Too much stuff open.
a not an intruder, but the big shark mouth. Can't remember the name of the airplane. Anyways, looked like they had toilets on the hard points.
Yeah, so they apparently during Vietnam they had dropped so much ordnance that they stopped giving a fuck about like what they were actually doing. There's no context anymore, and they were dropping this 6 millionth pound of ordnance, and they decided to put it into a toilet, and they dropped this toilet down onto Vietnam, Operation Toilet Bowl. Yeah,
And I'm sure that really, had a decisive effect on the war, right?
Well, and that's where war gets weird, right? Where you're so into it, it doesn't have any context anymore,
Right. Or it's so absurd. I mean, you're to the point where you have good friends that you made are dying on either side, and you just kind of
You're
just kind of
literally
lost in it. And
you're literally shitting on people. Like we did that. I'm not kidding. Like when we were underway, we were doing a war game against I think the USS Kentucky or one of the big ballistic missile submarines.
you dropped the toilet.
No, we blew shit on them. Like because submarines will have a shit tank and you blow shit overboard, right? And so our captain was like, he was just so mad because we were out there and they brought us out to sea to war game with this ballistic missile submarine. He was all pissed off. He's like, I can't believe they brought us out here for this shit. Fuck these motherfuckers. Like we destroyed them and we beat them 20-0 or something like that. Like they were just trying to test out some kind of new thing or whatever. And our captain was all pissed off. He's like, so what we're going to do, we're going to come up, we're going to go right over the top of them. We're going to blow shit on them. Okay. So that's what we did. We fucking came right on top of them. And as a AOW, I lined up sanitary tanks and I blew shit on top of I think it was the Kentucky or I don't know, one of those ballistic missile submarines in Florida or something. I don't know. But yeah, you get to the point where you just completely lose context. of what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, and now you're shitting on people. You know.
Yeah, you know what? Talking about nuclear weapons, they could be a really dangerous mindset to have.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know, they give you a false sense of security, right? Or I guess it maybe not false. I mean, it's a pretty good sense of security. I mean, but you know, look at our Coast Guard. You know, everybody always asks me, why doesn't our Coast Guard have submarines? We don't fucking need them. Like, why? Nobody's gonna attack us at this point. Nobody's gonna attack the homeland, because if they do, they're gonna have to deal with nukes, and a lot of nukes, or small nukes, or big nukes, or a shit ton of small. I mean, who even knows at this point what they're gonna have to deal with? So, you end up getting this weird sense of security based on deterrence, right? But it's all deterrence. If it all falls apart, it doesn't matter anymore. So now the fact that we don't have a Coast Guard makes a huge deal, right? If it does matter, because everybody could be dead. You know, it's. I think that's. There's a weird. I think that's where you get the weird separation between the non-proliferation and, you know, pro-deterrence. Is we all have big enough guns to where we don't fuck with each other. If we don't have big enough guns, we could fuck with each other, but let's just be nice. No, just be cool.
Be nice.
Just don't fuck with each other. Okay, you
It
guys be
is,
good.
and it's interesting watching North Korea become one of them, right? Because I mean, unless the U.S. is gonna invade them, I mean, I honestly don't have much hope in Trump and Kim Jong Un coming to some sort of deal where he's gonna give up all of his weapons, just hand them over. I think it's inevitable. You're gonna have to accept North Korea as a nuclear power, right? And at that point, like you're saying, you can't
You
have,
should have
you
done
know, you
that.
can't.
Yeah, you should have done that last year. If you didn't already accept North Korea as a nuclear power, then what are you doing with your life?
Yeah, yeah,
Move on. I mean, that's old news. Yes, North Korea is a nuclear power. It's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, you're
They
gonna
know-
have to accept it and add it into the nuclear states and treat it accordingly. I mean, there's not much you can do. You can sanction them, you can do different things like that, but are you gonna keep that up forever? I mean, the U.S. can sanction a country, right? But it needs other countries to enforce that to go along with those sanctions as well. And when you're talking about
we're
China
talking
and
about North
Russia,
Korea, that's China.
right? Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, North Korea is a nuclear power. That's gonna be just a fact of life for a very long time, if not for the remainder of the country's life. The country will be a nuclear power, and the sooner we can accept that fact, the sooner we can start talking to them in a more productive manner.
Right.
Right.
Eric, real quick.
You know,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say everybody likes to laugh at North Korea and the little hermit kingdom, but I mean they did it.
Yeah.
They have deliverable nuclear weapons. I mean,
Imagine having the GDP of Rhode Island and pulling off
Yeah,
a nuclear power
I mean-
program. I mean, it's or nuclear ballistic missile program. It's crazy.
It is such
Yeah.
an interesting state, but that's the fact of life. I mean, there is stuff to kind of look at and laugh at, but it's a nuclear power. Eric, I think since you have this image up in the background, you're gonna have to explain this. It's a pretty cool picture of I don't know, Ryan, if you can see this yet, but his
I do.
his background on his computer here.
Yeah. So this
It's like
is
a pumpkin submarine battle from the '60s or something.
Yeah. So being part of the moderator group for our submarines, so the submarines.reddit.com. One of the guys that's a follower or a subscriber to the subreddit actually made this pumpkin, and it's. I mean, I don't even know how to make a pumpkin like this. This is fantastic. But he made this pumpkin and posted it to the subreddit, so I made it my background. And I figured if we didn't have anything to talk about, we're just kind of talking about stuff, I can make it the kind of the default image. But I mean, it's fantastic. It's
I love this.
such a good.
I wish I was this artistic.
Seriously,
We made
me too.
My fiance and I we made a pumpkin, and we made it. It had like 3 teeth, and we named it Fred. We put it up in front of the door. That was as far as we went.
There you go. So here's another thing I wanted to talk about too. So this was something that came across our Discord server is this image of a Colombian submarine that's using a droid phone, looks like some kind of Samsung phone, as a scope monitor. So I was wondering if you've in your travels, if you've seen anything like this.
I certainly have not. I think people in around here in these parts might call that redneck in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's redneck in it, but look at the the amount of
Yeah, it looks like it's working.
machinery and time and money spent all around him just on the scope. But one of the things I find really interesting about this photo is, let's say you're Columbia, right, and you have an old Type 209 or an old German submarine that you bought a long time ago, and you want to put a photonics mast on it, right? A photonics mast being there's no tube of light. It's not a periscope anymore. It's not just a light coming into a mirror with the mirror bouncing it down through a tube and the mirror bouncing it into your eyeballs through the eye scope, right? It's a photonics mast it's a camera. It's a digital camera, generally a waterproof digital camera that sits on top, and it just shoots an image to your whatever TV screens, whatever, right? Um, uh, I got spoiled with this. The Flight 3s have they have periscopes, but they also have cameras on the periscope. So a periscope will go up, and you can see the optical image, but you can still see the digital image, and it will display it through the boat, right? So if you're in cruise mast, you can see what the scopes see. What I find interesting about this is because it's actually going to a phone, and from what I see in this image, there's no wire going into this phone. It looks like it is a wireless image. I'm assuming it's probably a Bluetooth image of some kind of program they wrote to dial into this mast, but these masts now can be created using or off the shelf technology, right? So the UUVs, the underwater unmanned vehicles, all these little torpedoes with cameras on them and stuff. All that technology can just be tied onto a periscope, and now you have a periscope that can be a photonics mast, and you can just tie it right into your phone, because we can't afford any other screens at this point. So just anybody got a phone? Anybody got a phone? There's Bluetooth it right to your phone. I got a phone. Let's do it. All right. So
You know what this also speaks to?
what's that?
This is a what, $1,000 solution to a major problem on a submarine, whereas the United States would spend $100,000 to fix the solution.
Right. So the United States has dealt with this with the Xbox controllers, right? They were going to have this $25,000 flight joystick that was supposed to control the photonics mast, and they were like, well, why don't we just use an Xbox controller? Right.
Off
So they
the
use an
shelf.
Xbox
Yeah.
controller, and it was like $25 or $50 or whatever. It's off the shelf, right? And so that's one of the interesting things you see with these smaller navies like North Korea, with Iran. They'll use a lot of off the shelf stuff. They'll use off the shelf radars. They'll use off the shelf small sonar. They'll use off the shelf weapons. Right, all this stuff that they could just kind of buy online, or buy at a or they could just buy it at I don't know. I hate to say it, but a gun show and just kind of import
Pretty
it
much,
in.
yeah. It's a
right?
lot cheaper, right?
Yeah,
Compared to
why
having
wouldn't
to
you?
build your own. I think the major problem with it is, at least from the U.S.'s perspective, is they view it as not as secure, right?
No security.
And
Where
sure,
if you have
and
the
we're
source
dealing with
code out there, you can possibly figure out an exploit to get into it, and do with it what you will.
and there's some differences, right? We're talking about a Colombian submarine, whereas, like Eric just mentioned, a Flight 3 Los Angeles class nuclear submarine. There's a big difference there between this and I don't know. I'm assuming this is a 209 is what we're looking at here.
Yeah, it's 209.
So there's a lot of different operations, and then the way the platform's going to be used. But you see this in more than just submarines. I mean, take anything, for example. Take the big F-35 program. I mean, what can we say about that? It just kind of makes me cringe. How much money that we've put into that program. I mean, it's a good program. I actually got the opportunity to go up really close and get to touch a couple of F-35s a few years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a really cool experience. I'm very grateful I was able to do something like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a beautiful machine. But come on, guys, that is a monster of a program, and I'm sure it could have been done cheaper and easier. But it seems to be working now. But you see this manifest itself in so many different things that the government gets involved in, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next topic, or do you have anything else to
No,
cover
no,
here?
go ahead.
The next topic we were going to discuss is Boeing. Boeing's been in the news a lot, both in the military sphere, but also in the commercial sphere with the, what is it, the 737 Air Max?
Yeah, the 737 Max and the KC-46 in particular.
Right, so the KC-46 is the new tanker that the U.S. has been developing and building.
Right, the KC-46 is designed to replace the very old and aging KC-135s, and it's too bad we don't have Dr. Hopkins here. You can follow him at CobraBall3 on Twitter if you're interested. He's the world-renowned expert on the KC-135.
Amazing guy. Yeah, you definitely have to follow him for sure.
Definitely do. He would be able to talk way more in depth of this, and he would probably be a little livid right now if we bringing up the KC-46 discussion. But essentially, it's a 767 that they're trying to make into a tanker. Sounds easy, right? Uh, Apparently not. Apparently, Boeing left a bunch of tools inside the KC-46, sealed them up in there, and they were rattling around. The crew thought that was a little weird, and checked under some panelings and found a couple of screwdrivers and some wrenches, and yeah, they thought that was kind of bad. So it's also like way behind schedule. They finally got one airplane delivered. I think that's the airplane you're seeing in this picture here. That's like the only airplane the Air Force actually has in possession right now, and they're using to test it. And that's actually the airplane that they found out a bunch of tools were left in. So it's been a boondoggle of an issue trying to get this new tanker going.
Yeah, and look at
And
what
then
happened. Look at what happened with the Thresher, right? So the Thresher had a bunch of strainers left in the system, and when they tried to emergency blow, they couldn't emergency blow, right? That shit makes a huge difference. You can't just leave tools inside of machinery because it's gonna fail, right? So I think the military at this point has learned that if you're gonna be so blatant with how much you don't give a shit about maintenance and you're just going to leave tools in there, then you probably got huge issues that you're going to have to deal with. And so I totally agree. I'm glad that there isn't more than just one as a test out there at this point.
And there might be. I'm not really up to date on the KC-46, but this, I mean, what is going on at Boeing right now? What in the world do they think is going on? Because we had the 737 Max issue. The 737 NG is having issues, which is one of the most widely used commercial airliner in the world. They're also developing a host of other platforms for the government. They dropped out of talking about the ground-based interceptor. They dropped out of that actually, and essentially gave the program to Northrop Grumman, and then got mad and filed a lawsuit that it wasn't competitive enough. I mean, I don't know what's going on at Boeing, but they need to fix their stuff
Boeing
really
is,
quickly. I love their products, but
yeah.
come on, what's going on?
Yeah, it's either that or Airbus, really, if you're going to fly domestically or even internationally.
Yeah, good
But,
luck with that.
Well,
but
speaking of Airbus, they have a fully functioning, completely working tanker that is literally almost the exact same size as the KC-46. It's
yep.
been operating for several years now. It's built on the A330 platform.
Wow.
Lots of countries use them. It's been working great. Is the Air Force going to turn to something like that that's working fine? No, because it's French built, so it's not built by the United States, and they've already sunk too much money into the KC-46, sunken cost fallacy.
Yeah,
So
no Boeing.
Well, that goes back to something I talked about in a recent video. I'm going to pronounce her name wrong, but I believe it was Kathleen Duryoung. So she was a lady in charge of acquisitions for the Air Force. She was particularly in charge of this new tanker contract they had around the year 2000, give or take a few years. They were running a contest, obviously, to see who would be the next tanker, and I believe Airbus was one of the main competitors to Boeing. And she had actually manipulated the program. She was so that Boeing would win it, and not only that, but she was actually transferring information supposed to be not shared, but she was giving all the information from Airbus that they were submitting to the Air Force, and she was giving it to Boeing, to the competitor. She got her daughter hired at Boeing, a huge salary for doing next to nothing. And then after she retired, she got hired at Boeing, a huge signing bonus. They did an investigation later on, and she actually got sentenced to prison for it. But, I mean, this is the same thing we're talking about now, that KC-46. And I think it also even goes back to what I was talking about before with the nuclear missiles and slapping a nuclear warhead on a JASSM, or, why they need to reinvent the wheel. Why is it so difficult to produce a tanker? I mean, this KC-46 program has had seemingly endless problems.
In this case in particular, I don't know. I really need somebody from Boeing to explain that, and maybe they've tried, but I don't think their answers have been good enough. It is a 767 that they're turning into a tanker. How hard can that be? Now, I'm sure there's very specific issues that you got to work on.
Right.
I'm sure there's a bladder in there. I'm sure it's not a wet, what we call quote unquote a wet wing, where the fuel is literally inside the wing. I'm sure it's a bladder of some kind that's in the fuselage. Sure, there could be issues with the bladder, and there could be issues with weight and balance, and maybe they're trying to get the bladders in such a way where they can place them in the fuselage and not have to completely redesign the airframe. I can understand that stuff, but it sounds like the issues that they're having more along, really more have to do with the airplane itself. So like the 767 rather than the special stuff they're doing with the tanker. So no idea what's going on there. Normally, I would say that reinventing the wheel, like you said, I would chalk that up to military industrial complex and big billion-dollar contracts that require out-of-the-box thinking. So you can't just reuse something that's old and repurpose it. So, but in this case, I have no idea what Boeing's doing. I would really like to hear from them and see what they think they're doing. Maybe they don't even know.
And they're involved in a whole bunch of programs too. Like another one that's had a few issues is that MQ-25, the Stingray.
Yeah, I think we're hearing less about the MQ-25 just because of it's. I don't know what the status of the program is, but it probably is a little bit more classified than anything that's going on with the 67. I think they're looking at with the MQ-25, the platform itself can be used for things other than a tanker, but a tanker in specific is what the Navy wanted, and so I don't know much about what that program is, but it's definitely behind schedule. I think if you do any kind of looking and perusing around there, so and another Boeing product that's behind schedule, CST-100. Maybe not a big deal there.
Oh,
because
the space program,
yeah,
to launch
right.
astronauts.
The Dragon Craft is behind.
They're both behind, yeah.
The
But
Dragon is behind schedule too.
at least they've launched it into space. I mean, it went up unmanned, but it did go up to the space station.
Right. The Crew Dragon went up to the space station, whereas the CST-100 hasn't flown to space yet.
So just to be clear, that's Boeing's entry into getting U.S. astronauts into space, by a U.S. company, and they're competing with SpaceX to have for the contracts, and that was interesting. I've been following that ever since the beginning, and originally it was they were only going to pick one, and it was kind of interesting that they ended up picking two. They picked both Boeing or ULA. Now that's ULA in total, right? Which Boeing is a part of.
Yeah, that's ULA, so United Launch Alliance, and that's a
Lockheed Martin and
that's Lockheed Martin and Boeing. So Lockheed Martin and Boeing actually aren't complete arch enemies. So Lockheed Martin, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. Lockheed Martin essentially builds the rocket, which is the Atlas, and Boeing builds the payloads or some other systems that go on the rockets. But yeah, it's a cooperation between Lockheed Martin and Boeing, which is what United Launch Alliance is. And so the CST-100 is their entry into the commercial crew program from NASA. And I thought NASA was really smart in choosing two designs, because if you just choose one design, there's not as much competition, and if there's a problem with the capsule, or there's a problem with the launch system, it's going to be a whole lot more expensive rather than if there's two independent companies who can kind of compete against each other. And then maybe you have two systems that work great together, and we've got two systems to rely on, and we can do rotations faster, and we can do more experiments faster, and we can do it all cheaper. So I thought that was a really good idea that they did that. I
Yeah.
wish other government agencies would learn from that.
Yeah, it's difficult with these huge projects. So I mean, if it's something smaller, you can easily have multiple companies competing against each other for that contract because they can kind of build prototypes and they can test them, make sure they're working and everything, and then offer it up to the government. Whereas in these huge programs, which are going to cost billions and billions of dollars just to do the research and development on, let alone actually constructing it and building it and launching it into space, it's much more difficult to actually have competition in that respect.
So is the MQ-25 built by Lockheed?
Yeah, it looks like it.
No, the MQ-25, I have it right up here on Wikipedia. Wikipedia has never been wrong.
According to that ad.
Yeah, according to that.
It's built by ULA.
It's everybody. They're all the same.
Oh, it's
No.
okay. The MQ-25.
No, it's not ULA. I'm joking. But
Okay, funny. Okay, well, we digress.
they probably build some sort of subsystem or something that is involved in it. You could probably do a search for it. So if we kind of so Boeing's been an interesting one, and I wonder if it kind of goes back. So when I was discussing that Kathleen DeYoung, so when she got hired from Boeing and they did this, the U.S. government did this corruption investigation into it, and they found her guilty, and then they found the person who hired and interviewed Kathleen DeYoung, and I believe it was one other person at Boeing, were both sentenced to prison. And then the actual CEO of Boeing was forced to resign because of it, and they had a huge fine. This was 2000s, maybe mid 2000s. I wonder if that has anything to do with it, if that's kind of carried over, if they've not had a competent CEO since, or if they've had problems from there. Because, yeah, it seems like they're having a lot of problems recently.
Well, the current CEO actually just lost his chairmanship. He's still the CEO, but he lost his chairmanship of the board.
Oh, man.
So I guess I can imagine, seeing that he lost his chairmanship, there's probably some sort of power struggle going on right now at Boeing. So I guess we'll find out if there's going to be a new CEO, a new leadership at Boeing. But certainly they need to get their act together. Like I said before, I love their products. I would love to fly a 737 or any of their other products that they have, but whatever they're doing, they need to figure it out and fix the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long road. I think Eric here is pulling up. You gonna pull up a picture of this just for reference, or?
Yeah, I was gonna try to pull up the CST 100. Something that's not gonna get us pulled off YouTube
for copyright infringement.
Yeah, that's.
They did just do a test a couple days ago. They launched it. They did a pad abort test here.
Yeah.
And
yes,
you know
they
what?
did a pad abort
And
test,
it failed.
and
Well, a parachute failed. One of the
yeah,
three
single
failed.
parachute failed. But did you notice when the capsule landed? Did you notice the
Orange smoke?
yes,
Yes.
the red fuming nitric acid
I
smoke?
did notice that, and it was interesting in the live stream of it. They're like, "Oh, everything went great. You know, everything's perfect." I'm like, "That doesn't look right. You know, this looks kind of suspicious."
well,
but they
they
never
used
mentioned
the-
it in the live podcast, or live.
Right, they use
thing.
hypergolic fuel
Oh my
in
God.
Yeah.
their reaction control system on the CST 100.
Oh,
So,
boy.
what happens when you've got hypergolic fuel that is released to the atmosphere very close to where the astronauts are going to be getting out of the capsule? Did they think about that in the design?
Yeah.
So
I mean, and
another,
that stuff
you
is
know,
very, very toxic too. And
it is.
just to be clear, yeah, that stuff is, you do not want to be inhaling it. If you ever seen pictures, I know a lot of people brought this issue up. If you see pictures of the X-37B, now this is a spacecraft that the U.S. has been testing for years now, which I'm not quite sure the exact reason for it. But there are some famous pictures of when it's back on Earth after landing. Everyone has these hazmat suits on when they're inspecting it. And
full body pressure suits.
exactly, yeah, and they're like, oh, this might have some sort of indication on what the use of it. No, it's not necessarily. It's the hypergolic fuels that they have on board are extremely toxic.
That's
Oh,
right.
here we go. You got a picture of it.
Yeah.
It uses some hypergolic fuel for its reaction control system too. This is a common product actually. The X-37B is a common product with the CST-100. They were both built by Boeing. The X-37B back many years ago now, when the first prototype was first thought of. But they are both Boeing products, and they both use hypergolic fuels, and that's why they have to suit up. So sure, it could be because one of the experiments or one of the devices that they might have on the X-37, but it's because of the hypergolic fuels. And so you'll see here, Eric's got a video playing of the CST-100, and as that module falls, you'll see.
Oh, is it the module? It switches back here. I know you're a little bit delayed, but yeah, you can see only the 2 parachutes. There should be 3.
Right.
And then, oh yeah, you're right. It is from the module. It just switched over. I know you're delayed a little bit, but yeah, I saw that. I'm like, this cannot be right. This does not look good.
Yeah, and it is. That's the way the design is. So this is back to Boeing. What were you thinking?
Yeah, well, also that module there, at least if the launch is successful, because this is a pad abort test. So this is if something goes wrong with the rocket, it's about to explode, this thing ejects off to try to save the crew. This is not normal operations of the CST-100. What it would do is it would launch.
But that module would depart the capsule almost in the same way. Because as you saw, the module dropped off when the parachutes opened, so it would do the same thing in an in-flight abort.
Right, in a pad abort test. But
in an in-flight abort, it would do the same thing too.
So in a normal launch, though, it's going to be up in space, and that thing is probably going to separate before it starts re-entering the atmosphere, right? Because the heat shield is on the actual capsule there.
That's right. So in a completely normal flight that had a very normal
wouldn't
ending,
be an issue.
Yeah, that module would get burned up in the atmosphere, and so these fumes, you wouldn't see them. I mean, this wouldn't happen.
But this is all the small stuff. So, like, I mean, this even goes back to what I've brought up like 3 or 4 times throughout this podcast now. But the reinventing the wheel, the talking about putting a nuclear warhead on a JASM or any other examples we talked about, it's all these small little issues you have to think about. Now, a pad abort test is not normal. I think there's only been 1 or maybe 2 times wherever with humans on board a rocket, they've had to actually launch this launch escape system. One of them was just recently with the Soyuz, if you recall that.
That's right.
But for the most part, they do not have to do this. But this is like the small thing that almost never happens that they do have to take into consideration. I mean, this is trying to save the astronaut's life, and if they're saved from the explosion of the first and second stage, but then they get back down to Earth and they breathe in noxious fumes and they end up dying from that, I mean, then obviously that's a problem too.
Sure.
So I think it's all these small things that you might not think about, and that's what I'm always interested in.
And that goes towards almost anything.
Right. So I think I always think I never like to just say something negative like that, because I mean, I think there are reasons. It's just that we have not been able to understand them. Again, going back to the JASM and the nuclear warhead, I'm sure there are reasons why they don't just slap a nuclear warhead on a JASM.
Well, there's a quote from Red October. Sure, but would you want to?
And also, you don't get as much money for all the research and development if you just do that too, right?
There you go.
Exactly. So, speaking of awesome, cool weapons and people doing smart things, our good friend to all 3 of us, Tyler Rogaway, posted an article showing just recently here, showing a laser system on board the USS Dewey.
Yeah, we're both pulling it up at the same time. Mysterious laser turret appears on the USS Destroyer USS Dewey. So it's an Arleigh Burke class. Now this looks like a smaller laser. I haven't read the article yet, but this looks like something. This is probably for drones or something, right?
A laser dazzler meant to blind the enemy optics.
Oh, so not even for drones. It's just meant to. Huh. That's interesting. So that's right where they put the phalanx before. Now they've removed that phalanx on the newest ships, and that's where it's gonna. It looks like it's where it's gonna be. Helios
Lasers
concept.
on ships, people. Lasers on ships. We are in the future.
I think we're still a few years away from any real laser combat, but I think one of the main problems is power. Right, you need enough power to
Right.
power these lasers, and if you don't have a nuclear-powered ship, I mean that Arleigh Burke only has so much power that it can put out for weapons like
Well,
this.
that's why the U.S. Navy developed the Zumwalt with double the power capacity, and the new Ford class carriers has doubled the capacity for what it currently operates on. But
Exactly.
we all know how well
How the
both of
Zoom
those
wall turned
programs
out,
have
yeah.
been going.
Well, everybody talks shit about the Zumwalt, but everybody talks shit about the Seawolf too. And oh, the Seawolf ain't done shit. I mean, yeah, I guess, but I mean, it spawned a whole class. So
Yeah, but
Sure
the
did.
but
I'm
the Zoom
telling
wall, the Zoom wall didn't spawn a new class.
Not
They went
yet.
backward,
Well,
back to the
yeah.
Arleigh Burke, and we're gonna build more of those.
Well, they got the Block 3 coming out now, so it's you have to have that experimental platform to experiment on. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
it has
maybe
to
it
be
could-
stupid and not make any sense. The Seawolf is stupid. It doesn't make any sense. It has 8 tubes. There's never been another. It just doesn't. It's dumb. It doesn't make any sense. But when you use it as a test platform, like the North Koreans do with their Senpo ballistic single shot, now it's gonna be whatever we. Who knows now what it's gonna be, right? It always spawns from that initial platform. So, yeah, I mean that may look dumb, and they're just shooting lasers into air pilots' eyes, or whatever the fuck, but it's gonna turn into some shit.
Well, I'll tell you right now.
Eventually, yeah.
Speaking of lasers and pilots' eyes, that is some really crazy stuff that you could implement that in a battle space and really be effective.
Yeah.
Um,
We were
who-
watching. I was watching police. What is it called? Live PD.
Oh.
And they went to this guy's house because he was shooting a laser at a helicopter pilot's eyes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but in the event of a war, though, who is getting close? What pilot is getting close enough to your destroyer that you're going to be able to shine a laser in his eyes?
Somebody, well, their fighter jet probably has an extra space there for the size of his balls.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're talking about modern long-range anti-ship missiles and stuff like that. I mean, a Russian aircraft isn't getting it close enough to this Arleigh Burke to be able to be blinded by a laser.
No, definitely not. No, I think the purpose of this test platform here that we got on USS Dewey is to test new coming technology about blinding sensors and whatnot.
Right, and it's
Yeah, they've from what I've seen at this point, they've used lasers to attack small boats trying to attack large boats. So you got a small boat coming at you. You got a good 5 minutes to sit there and lock some type of laser onto it, and you can just melt whatever you're trying to melt on that thing.
and that's been the biggest threat too. These small, fast attack craft that Iran has. I mean, almost hundreds of, right?
Right.
Hundreds of these things, and that's the hardest thing. You have a big, huge ship, extremely powerful ship, but these kind of the death by 100 cuts type thing.
Well, it's like the coal. You can sit there
Yeah,
and
like the
you
coal, I
get
was gonna
taken
say
out
that.
by just a dinghy.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, after the coal happened, we had a huge, there was this sense of boxes, right? Like, if there's a thing coming at you with boxes, that box has to be full of explosives. So, right after I got to my boat, I got to my boat in 2003, so this was a year or two after 9/11. And after 9/11 happened, they started getting really crazy with the drills. I mean, they were getting crazy with drills. They were trying to make him as realistic as possible to try to put you in, that situation, right? And so, after I got to the boat, the torpedo men were telling me about this story, how they had a drill on the pier, and this is before drill monitors. Drill monitors being, if you're going to be on the pier with a gun and there's going to be a drill, we're going to have a guy stand next to you to make sure that you don't accidentally shoot somebody. Like, this is going to be a person with like a red hat, that's going to be part of the drill, right? So you know that it's a drill. I'm going to stop you before you shoot somebody. This is before that happened. So the drill was, we're going to have this guy rush the pier with a box. 2 people are going to rush the pier with a box. They're going to go towards the same submarine, which happened to be mine. And we're I don't know. We're going to see what happens.
So these guys are running through the gates carrying a box?
As far as I understand, this is the story they told me. So the story they told me was it rushed the pier. These 2 guys got to the boat. They rushed the brow. The petty officer of the deck, who's the guy that stands there that checks IDs, grabbed one guy, pushed him over the brow into the water. So he's got one guy into the water. Now there's a second guy that runs behind him with a box.
He's got a box too.
Right. So right after 9/11, submarines have different security postures. They were in like the highest security posture, right? And so at this point, they have a guy that sits in the sail in port with a fully loaded machine gun, ready to just shoot anybody that tries to rush the boat. This guy is rushing the boat with a box. And we still don't know this is a drill. They don't know this is a drill at this point. And so he cocks I think it was a Mark 43. I can't remember. At this point.
50 caliber.
Yeah, it's a 50. It's a short barrel Mark 60. Mark 40.
Okay.
Mark 46. I think. I can't remember at this point, but he cocks it back and he's pointing at this guy like, "I'm gonna kill you." And this guy takes the box, he throws the box up in the air, it's empty.
Right,
so it just kind of floats,
away,
floats, and he stops, and then people come up from the hatch, they rush the guy, they grab him, they take him down, they found out it's a drill. And he goes, I actually knew the guy that was on my boat, and I was talking to him about it, and he goes, I was half an inch
from shooting him?
From shooting this motherfucker.
Oh,
I was going to kill him. Because I was getting ready to kill the guy who they threw over the brow. But they threw him over the brow. And
Good
this
thing
guy...
they could have been dead then.
This guy had actually got to a point where he was under the sail and I couldn't get him. That was the only thing that saved his life, because I was going to kill him.
Wow.
I was going to shoot him.
You think during a drill they would have like removed the ammo or replace it with something else, you know? Like make sure no one's actually going to get killed in this drill, right? No?
Well, this was right after 9/11, so they wanted to give you
ultimate realism.
120%.
People actually dying in real life.
Yeah, exactly. What the fuck?
I would not want to be that guy who draws
are you going to do?
The short stick.
Yeah.
Who has to carry the box.
Yeah. What are you going to do? Yeah, and that's what happened.
And it's interesting how much it's... I mean, you're talking about a massive nuclear-powered submarine. One of the most powerful forces on Earth, right? And it's dangerous by... I can't say that. It's threatened by this guy with... I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to make a very immature joke. So, it's threatened by this guy with a big package. I couldn't hold a straight face while saying that. But yeah, it's threatened by this guy with a box, right? This most powerful weapon pretty much on the battlefield. And I think that goes back to the lasers we're talking about here, right? I think that's what it's kind of combating. These
yeah,
guys with a big package.
Yeah, just... Oh man, Greg's passed out done because of a package joke. Oh jeez. But yeah, I mean as stupid as that story is, it's just a box. Nobody knows what's inside the box. Fucking there could be a fucking nuke inside that box, right? We were talking about suitcase nukes. I mean, it could be fucking anything inside that thing. You look at a Tomahawk, the UGM-109 Alphas, that package. I mean, that's only like 1.5 feet. I don't obviously know. I've never seen an Alpha. Our boat was never rated to carry alphas or anything like that, but I mean, it's not much. It can't be more than 2 feet. I mean, you could obviously stick that in any kind of 55-gallon drum or barrel or suitcase and those. I mean, and he's laughing but nobody fucking knows, man. Like nobody knew what that guy was doing. That guy is lucky he's still alive at this point. I can't believe that Navy allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
And they didn't allow that to happen after that, by the way. Like, that wasn't a thing after that. Like, they learned their lesson after that. Because the other guy ended up in the water. So when you go in the water next to the boats, you have to get shots and shit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the water's so gross because of the oils and stuff. So
Huh.
Well,
yeah,
I can imagine.
yeah, you have to get treated by the Navy and stuff. But yeah, it was just too much. No, go ahead.
Okay. So off that, the other one we wanted that's been in the news a lot, Ryan, is Baghdadi and ISIS. Now I'm sure you've been following that event closely. I mean, we have the whole event with Conan the dog, right? That's made the rounds on the internet.
Oh, who could miss that?
But it seems like it really did not get anywhere near the attention that Bin Laden got. Now, obviously, Bin Laden was able to attack America directly, so that it might not be as deeply ingrained in the American psyche as Baghdadi was, right? But I would almost argue that Baghdadi had a larger force than
Well,
Bin Laden
that
ever
goes
did.
back to, that goes back to perception, right? Who has the media trumped up most? I mean, in the preceding days to Saddam's killing, I mean, the media was just hammering him. I mean, it was Bin Laden all the time, um, and then our Saddam. I'm talking about Saddam. It was Saddam all the time. It was let's get Saddam, let's kill Saddam, and pumping up all the public. And then with Bin Laden, um, he was this. He was made out to be the figure. We're going to kill Bin Laden for years. This is the guy. This is your number one enemy. This, that, and the other. With Baghdadi, I mean, he was mentioned a couple of times, and if you ask the average citizen, they probably don't know. They
Oh,
probably
yeah.
didn't know who Baghdadi was
I would agree with you there.
before he was killed.
Yeah.
But
Everyone knew
I'm
Bin
sure they
Laden,
do now.
right? Everyone knew Bin
But
Laden.
everybody, yeah,
But no one knew
yeah,
Baghdadi until he actually was killed and it was announced on the news, probably more or less. Yeah.
yeah, that goes back to the control of the media.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think with like I said with Bin Laden, he did attack the American homeland, so no one can forget that. Who was responsible for that? It was Bin Laden, right? So it was all over the news compared to
Yeah,
Baghdadi, not as much.
every school child in that from that generation knew that.
Right.
So, but yeah, Baghdadi, and in Baghdadi's case, I mean, when Saddam was, I mean not Saddam, when Osama bin Laden was killed, Al Qaeda was already on the out and the out. They were still formidable, but they were on their way out. Now Al Qaeda is pretty much done for. I mean, they're still there and they're still active, but they're not a global force. They could not possibly project what they used to be able to. Um, that might change. That might change in the coming years. They might be able to build their strength, but certainly they're on the out. ISIS was on the out, um, but ISIS is still a little bit. ISIS is more a little bit more formal, a little bit more constructed than Al Qaeda was, and so killing Baghdadi probably really didn't do much other than um, strengthen the cause, help recruitment levels, and make a martyr out of him. So really, I don't think it did much. I mean, it probably made the situation worse, if not anything. But what are you going to do? If you have intelligence that says that you killed the leader of ISIS, you're going to do it. And I would, if I was the president or if I was somebody in power, I would have made the same decision. But it probably didn't really help anything.
The interesting thing was this was in northwest Syria, right? So this was an area that wasn't necessarily under U.S. control, if you can say that, at least in Syria. And also it came out that the U.S. discussed this with both the Syrian government and Russian government, correct? Before they did the strike.
And they certainly would want to consult the Russians. The Russians are heavily operating in Syria, a little bit less so than they were previously, but they're still operating there. We wouldn't want them to mistake any kind of insertion, especially with some noisy CH-46s.
No stealth
with
helicopters this time, huh?
yeah, these things are not stealth helicopters. You can see them from thousands of miles away. I'm sure with the proper radar, they're big, ugly, and they put off a lot of heat. So I'm sure that we would want to make sure the Russians knew what was going on. We wouldn't want them to mistake our attack for anything other than what it was. Certainly wouldn't want the Russians to lob a few SAMs in the air and take out a CH-46. And the same thing for the Syrians. So even though we really don't like the Syrians, we really wouldn't want them to take out a bunch of Chinooks.
Right.
So I'm sure we had talks and made sure that everybody knew this was to get the leader of ISIS. It's in everybody's best interest. Don't kill our guys. We'll be in and we'll be out.
So we
Right.
should. Oh, sorry. We showed a couple videos here. The first one was special forces entering into the compound. It's a very short, very grainy. Not doesn't really give you much information, but it shows them entering into the right before they got to the outside of the walls. And then the video that Eric's showing right now. This is the complex. This is after they were already done. This is after Baghdadi is supposedly dead. They had drones go in there and actually just level the compound. And I don't know if we could show them just because of copyright laws, but different news agencies have gone into this area now afterward, and it's just complete rubble. I mean, there's almost nothing left at all. I mean, you can tell before this, uh, excuse me, you can tell before this bomb hit. Rewind a little bit there, Eric. Go to the and pause it right there. So you can tell before this bomb hit. I mean, it's a pretty detailed compound, right? You have the main structure in the middle. You have a surrounding wall. You have a driveway. You have stairs leading up to it, and a truck there. And then again, that's already after the raid. So they leveled it again, kind of like they did with Bin Laden. So what do you think then the future of ISIS will be? Do you think this is going to be? Now you can point to several points, whether it's the fall of Mosul or Al Raqqa, or different things to point toward the beginning of the end of ISIS. Do you think they're going to start to fade away now? I mean, I know they've lost pretty much all territory they owned before. Do you think that this is going to kind of fade into history, kind of like Al Qaeda has at this point?
Had the events in Syria of the past couple months not taken place, I probably would have answered yeah. Probably would have said that ISIS was on the out. But now that Turkey's moved into Syria and the United States has pulled out quite in a significant manner, it's kind of left open these areas that ISIS had previously. So it's hard to say if the current status quo is maintained. ISIS probably won't reach a point that it had at its peak, but I don't think it's going away anytime soon. Now, if the United States was really hitting them hard and had um, I know that there are still airstrikes going on and there is still a military presence there, but it's not what it was. They they might be able to hold them back, but ISIS, they have some pretty strong numbers,
Hmm.
and they have some. Like I said, they're more formal. They have real commanders. They train like a military. I don't think they're going to be going away anytime soon. I don't think they're going to be a big resurgent force like they were, but if left unchecked by all the major powers, the United States, Russia, if left unchecked, they could become a potential resurgent threat. Um, but they're not going to go the way of Al Qaeda. I think they're going to remain relevant at least for a little bit.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, they also have support in other areas in Africa, Libya, different spots like that, even in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I think people who supported Al Qaeda in the past, monetarily and religiously, and supported the cause and liked the cause of Al Qaeda, I think they saw Al Qaeda as an organization that could um, give results, but I think
Right.
they've seen in ISIS a true um, a true organization that has produced in the past and can continue to produce in a more professional manner than Al Qaeda would ever have been able to do. So I don't think it's going to be losing support anytime soon from those
That's
people who support it.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, Al Qaeda was always kind of this unhinged, separated group, right? You had different Al Qaeda operators kind of spread across sporadically throughout Afghanistan, different areas. You had the Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. You had different sections of them, but it wasn't the same as ISIS was or Daesh. They ISIS had an actual territory. They had a very large area that they controlled very definitely. And they didn't just have some sort of terrorist group that were conducting operations, but they actually had a government, right?
Oh yeah, they did. Um, they're a whole lot more organized than Al Qaeda ever was. Al Qaeda was kind of always operated as a ragtag group, even at their height. When they pulled off the 9/11 attacks, I mean they were still they were never as formally structured as ISIS or Daesh ever was. It's hard to break down uh, a tight military structure like the one that ISIS has formed. So I think that's a good reason to point to that they're not going to be going away. So if you hear in the media that ISIS is defeated, are they?
Yeah,
Mission accomplished.
right. Yeah, let's go on top of an aircraft carrier, have a big banner going across. Yep, we won.
I'm gonna pull it up.
See how quick you can do it, Eric. But I mean, the mission's never accomplished, right? There's always going to be something else. I mean, and also I think we're kind of almost comparing apples and oranges with ISIS and Al Qaeda, at least. I think you can almost compare it more. Now that I think about it more, with the Taliban, right? The Taliban actually controlled Afghanistan for a while, the entire
They
government.
still do.
Right? Yeah, true. Yeah, a large area. Yeah. Oh, there you go. You got the George Bush
Oh
picture.
god, it's so hard. There's so many
Ads.
So
And there, on the screen, if you're watching on
Nice.
YouTube, is a picture of a good dog. There's Conan. And then soon we'll have a picture of Bush. But is there any other topic before we wrap up here that you'd like to cover? Any other thing going on in the news that's reached your attention?
Like I was telling y'all before we started, it's been pretty quiet. Any followers to our Twitter account will notice that it's been very silent, um, uh, very unnormally silent, and that's just because there hasn't been a lot to report on. There had been a couple little things, but the past couple weeks have been dominated by domestic politics, and I typically don't like to get involved with domestic politics. I don't really like to get to comment too much on what's going on in DC.
Yeah.
So we've been pretty quiet, and there just really hasn't been much going on ever since pretty much Baghdadi. He was killed, and hasn't been much else. Baghdadi was killed, and the Russian submarines that came down through the Gwick Gap. So uh, it's always nice to get respites like this. Because we'll have a couple of months or a period of time where it's just one thing after another, after another, after another. Um, so while everybody might like to consume national security news and like to dig into OSINT like this, all the operators and all of us who specialize in this field, sometimes it is nice to get a respite like this and just kind of calm down and assess what's going on and think about how we want to improve our services. So it's been nice, even though our consumers haven't been getting anything. It's the little quiet period's been nice.
So you get to catch up on kind of different things that are going on and refresh some stuff. What else do you do
Sure.
in the time off like this? Do you have any other hobbies? Do you like? I know for me, for example, like military defense and learning things like that is almost my entertainment. I'll watch an old World War II documentary. Eric always gives me a hard time the way I say that.
everybody does in their mind.
Um, or reading about different news. What do you do for fun on your time off?
Well, I'm a commercial pilot, so I fly a lot. I really enjoy flying. Recently, I've been working on my flight instructor, and that is an extremely time-consuming endeavor.
Huh.
So any free time that I've had in the past about the past month, has been dedicated to working towards that goal.
Nice. We'll have to get you to fly up here. I know we've discussed it a few times. Hopefully we can get you to fly up here and hang out and do some stuff.
Man, you know how many times I've watched La Bamba and watched Richie Valens die on a small airplane? I really want to fly at one. I'm just saying. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die in a small airplane.
And playing La Bamba?
By Ryan
We tried
Barenklau.
very hard to not have that outcome.
That's good.
I mean, we're all going to hope that doesn't happen. But if it does, I'm going to go out like a rock star. You know what I'm saying? Fly into an air show somewhere.
An air show, or how about Area 51? That'd be the way to go out. At least you get to see the aliens. That was a major failure. I was extremely disappointed about that. They did not rush the gates at all. They didn't. I'm not familiar with all the anime stuff, but Naruto Run, or what was it called?
Naruto.
Naruto Run.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. What do you do?
All right. Well, I think that wraps up for this week. Thank you for being back on, like I think I said earlier, but you're the first guest to actually come back on, and we greatly appreciate it. It's always fun. Very knowledgeable.
Yeah, man. Mission accomplished.
There we go.
Well, I love talking to you guys. I'll be happy to come on any other time. Thank you for having me again, and hopefully we can collaborate more in the future. And I'd love to take y'all for a ride. Maybe we could live stream a show from an airplane. That'd be cool, wouldn't it? We could
in the air?
Oh, God.
Yeah, we could fly around the DFW Metroplex, and y'all could live stream a show. Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be pretty cool, yeah.
Could.
Well, anyway, that about wraps up for this week. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Well, thank you for having me.